So we have begun. If you can start, Professor, maybe.
Okay. Good evening and welcome everyone. I welcome you to this panel discussion. I'm Dr. Mimi Roy. I'm a professor and assistant dean at the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. I'm also the co-director to the Center for Environment, Environment, Sustainability and Human Development at JSLH. So just last week on the 22nd of April, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Earth Day. And to commemorate this event, we have the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities have organized this panel discussion today, which is titled Earth Day 2020, Reflections on Environmental Sustainability Post-COVID-19, The Way Forward. So since we are talking about Earth Day today, we would first let me try to introduce the panelists that we have here. So we have Professor Armin Rosenkrantz. He is the professor and dean of the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. Our next panelist is Professor Shrirup Chaudhary. He is a professor and co-director to the Center of Environment, Sustainability and Human Development at the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. We have Professor Stephen Marks, who is a distinguished visiting professor and special advisor to the Vice Chancellor at O.P. Jindal Global University. He is also the Franco Xavier Bagno Professor of Health and Human Rights at Harvard University. Our fourth panelist is Professor Abhijit Banerjee. He is an associate professor and associate director to the Center for Environment, Sustainability and Human Development at the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. So before we get to the discussion of the panel, since we are celebrating Earth Day, we would like to hear from Professor Armin Rosenkrantz the legacy and history of the Earth Day. Dr. Rosenkrantz was, this movement started in the 1970s in the West, and during that time, Dr. Rosenkrantz was a faculty member at the Stanford University, and he was instrumental in various kinds of environmental movements during that time. So, Professor Rosenkrantz, if you can just tell us about a brief history about the Earth Day.
Okay, anybody can call me Armin. I'd prefer that. Okay, Dennis Hayes was a friend of mine. We were both student body presidents at Stanford in the same, essentially the same 5-year period. I was in 1963 and he was in 1967. He was the founder of Earth Day in 1970 when he was working for Senator Gaylord Nelson. 12 million people participated in that first Earth Day in 1970. By 1990, 141 countries participated in Earth Day 1990, and today 193 countries are involved. It is the most observed worldwide holiday except for Christmas and New Year's. So also, it's probably useful to know that the Paris Agreement of 2015, which is the latest international agreement on climate change, and which was signed on Earth Day 2016 by the United States, China, and 120 other nations. Okay, that's enough, I think, of background on Earth Day.
Thank you, Armin, for briefing us about the background of the Earth Day. So we know that also during that time in India, several environmental movements were shaping up. We have the Chipko movement, which began in about 1973, and there were different types of laws and legislations that started coming around the environment during that time. And as we progressed, 1980, 1990, there are several environmental movements that have been shaping up the world, and we are still struggling with some, very acute environmental issues at present, like climate change, environmental pollution, environmental degradation. So, climate change and environmental pollution being, some of the acute problems that we have today. Now we will like to, and since people who live in the Delhi NCR region, we know that air quality, air pollution is a major issue that we face, and we gasp for breath during the winter months every year. So, and post the lockdown, post the lockdown, it a lot of people have been telling that the AQI has actually improved. So let's hear from Professor Shrirup Chaudhary about how does the air quality looks pre-lockdown and post-lockdown. Professor Shrirup Chaudhary.
Okay. So, first I must say is that what we are doing, we are going through an unprecedented stage of world history. We have never seen this thing before. Means the whole world is kind of shut down now because of particular virus. But as we all kind of know about bad things, hard things about this virus, but it came to me, it came to me through a couple of bachelors who one day came to me after saying, "Sir, did you ever notice that we are having a really good stuff?" So I was kind of surprised. Saying, okay, so what's that? So they come from Delhi. They have been born and brought up in Delhi. So they say that you will not believe that yesterday night we went up to the roof, and for the first time we got the star, clear star, all over the sky. So it's a really kind of strange thing. Remember when we last saw that? I said, okay, what can I do? So what shall we do actually of that? They say that if we run a little research project on this to check the Delhi.
If I may pause for a minute, Professor Chaudhary, you are not very audible. So can you just maybe take the computer more closer towards you, because sound seems to yeah.
So I didn't realize that thing. So could you guys hear me now?
Yes, it's better.
Yes, better.
So what I'm saying is that the whole thing, the relationship between Delhi and the COVID, the idea came through a couple of students who work at our Center for Environment. They say that we can see the stars clearly. So let's run a research project on this thing. Check the daily air quality divided into periods of the day. And let's see how the air
Sorry to interfere.
So
Yeah.
since then,
Professor Shrirup, there is a lot of echo. There is a lot of echo in your voice. I'll request all the panelists to mute their own, mute themselves, because there is a lot of echo which is coming. We are not able to understand. If you can all mute yourself if you are not speaking. There is a button on the screen that you can click to mute yourself. Yeah, Professor Shrirup, I think that should help.
So are you guys okay now? So okay, let me start again. So what I'm saying is that we've been looking at this Delhi air quality in terms of corona COVID virus, actually the lockdown things, how this lockdown has affected the Delhi NCR, the Delhi air quality. Later on, we're going to expand our vision to the whole of India to see whether during this corona lockdown, this COVID-19 shutdown, whether the Delhi air quality has improved, remained the same, or gone down or something. So what we are doing from on behalf of our Center of Environment in here is basically student-run project. So the students, what they're looking out, they are collecting data from Delhi Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB, the Central Pollution Control Board. They keep a regular tab on the air quality data, air quality index in Delhi, as well as most of the urban cities. So what they have been doing, they are running this small research project to see that since the day the lockdown began up till this time of 27th April, they have been monitoring the Delhi air quality. Now in Delhi, there are about 37 air quality monitoring stations which record daily data on a real-time basis. They record concentration of particulate matter 2.5, particulate matter 10, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide. So there are a whole range of pollutants which are of great concern to us when it comes to breathing. So the students who are involved in this project, they are looking at the a time series difference, the time series change in the concentration, the ambient air quality concentration of these particulate matter or all of these air quality component in 2020 at present time, since the lockdown began in 25th March, and they are comparing the same data with 2019 from 25th March to April 27th to see whether there is a mathematical difference, statistically significant difference between the air quality values as recorded by 35 air quality monitoring stations in Delhi. A subsidiary idea in there is means what I should say, that what we are seeing, that there has been substantial difference, substantial improvement in at least three things. One, particulate matter 10. Particulate matter 10 right now is pretty low in all the monitoring stations if you compare it with the same period of 2019. The concentration of carbon monoxide, it's pretty low. What we are guessing is completely because of the shutdown of the cars and traffics. And the level of nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere is typically low. Now, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, all these things, the main man-made source, apart from the natural sources, the man-made source is the vehicular emission. The other source are coal and fly ash. The other sources are road dust and biofuel burning. So this is a basic study, a preliminary study. The two students, they have just started looking at the change in the composition, the air quality composition in 2019 and 2020. They are comparing it across Delhi, 9 or 10 districts of Delhi, to figure out where this difference is being noticed most perceptibly. But so far, what we have found, that this lockdown, this corona COVID virus has kind of made the scenario better for us, because the Delhi air quality, the whole of NCR region, the air quality has improved significantly. So we need to look into more details of the thing, that how this thing is going on around Delhi. And later on, maybe what our goal is, that to come up with some recommendations, some regulations, some policy recommendations or something, so that if we can maintain Delhi in this present state of air quality. Now, we cannot expect Delhi to be under lockdown for a week or so, but that's the role of the decision makers, policy makers to figure out. Our role means, from our center of environment, we are trying just to look at how the air quality has changed, how the air quality has improved. I'm not saying it has improved drastically, but it has improved. And if this goes on, means you do not see the change drastically. Means if you do the lockdown last night, you will be seeing drastic change today in the air quality. It's a slow process. It's a slow onset process, but we have already started to see the change.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary, for telling us about the picture of the how the pollution is, how the lockdown and how the pollution scenario is during this pandemic. And it's good to know that that this lockdown has significantly improved the air quality. And we know that the environment has also started healing up, because of the improvement in the air quality. We see that we now know that the Jalandhar mountain, from Jalandhar we can see the Dhauladhar mountain ranges, so which means that the air quality has significantly changed. Even if we go out to our balconies or on the roof, as Professor Chaudhary was telling, we can see the stars and we can feel that the air is much much cleaner and much purer. And which is also backed up by data. The AQI values are significantly low, pre-lockdown and post-lockdown. And so, yes.
If I may jump in, what you say, yes, means we could really visibly see the stars. We can see as far as almost a mile and a half. But the most noticeable improvement that we have felt these days is that we can breathe our lungs full. We can really breathe. We can really stand out there. We can really start to breathe. Now, unfortunately, due to this corona thing, we have to put on a mask all the time. But sometimes I feel like taking the mask off and really breathe the fresh, clean air.
wish we could do it when we, go outside for a walk. We could take our mask off and breathe the pure air. So now we move forward, and we will we will try to look at how this, when we are talking about air quality, does air quality has a direct relationship to the COVID infection. So if I may ask Professor Rosenkrantz if you can tell us something about about the relationship between the COVID virus and the air pollutants or the air quality.
Thank you, Mimi, and thank you, Shrirup, for anticipating much of what I was going to say. Basically, particulates are probably the most health impacting and dangerous of all the air pollutants. Airborne particulates may help spread the virus. They seem to be carriers of contagion, and people living in polluted countries such as northern Italy are more likely to have compromised respiratory systems, which make them therefore more vulnerable to COVID-19. Many countries are lowering their air pollution regulations to restart their economies. We've now seen that 80% of COVID-19 deaths in 4 countries, Italy, Spain, France, and Germany, were in the most polluted regions of those countries. And they have the most nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, total suspended particles, especially fine particle pollution, and ozone. The UK and the US seem to have more nitrogen oxides in areas with high traffic. So that has, I mean, obviously there's much less traffic in the lockdown than there ever was before, but it's an interesting correlation between air pollution and COVID-19 cases. So that's basically my wrap. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. So, we know from Professor Armin that that people are more vulnerable to COVID-19 infections in areas of high air pollutants, or where the AQI values are considerably higher. So we also see that comorbidities or mortality rates are much higher when the air pollution is when people are more vulnerable to air pollution, and at the same time they are more susceptible to COVID-19 infections. So now yes, Armin, do you have something to say? We can't hear you. Probably your microphone is muted.
No. What?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, I was just saying that you summarized what I had said very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. So now, as we move forward, the lockdown will be over soon. We are anticipating how soon we can, take out this lockdown, and the economy. We try to, bring back the economy, and industries open. We'll soon have cars on the road. So as we continue to reopen the economy, how do we move forward so that we learn some lessons from this pandemic and we don't go back to square one? So my next question is to Professor Marks, that how do you envision the prospects of global and national policies, the shift of policies in climate change post the pandemic? How do the science will relate to the policy and its implementation?
Okay, Mimi, thank you very much. And I want to extend my warm greetings to all of the people who are participating and observing this webinar. And I think the way you presented it, Mimi, is quite accurate. We are anticipating a period when the virus will cease to be the immediate threat it is to human life. Whether that's going to be soon or in more than a year from now remains to be seen. We have to be prepared for a long period before we can envisage the speed with which and the methods through which we restore the normal functioning of society. And before I get to that, though, because it is related to comments that others have made previously about the motivation of the creation of Earth Day and some of the other findings regarding air pollution. So let me make two brief remarks on that before I get into the direct answer to your excellent question. As Armin pointed out, Dennis Hayes worked for Senator Gaylord Nelson when in 1970, a massive demonstration of the population, about 10% of the population of the United States, rallied around the issue that was predominant then for the environment, namely dirty air and dirty water. The idea was we must act to improve, and the political pressure that they brought succeeded in the adoption of significant legislation on those matters. But the co-founder of Earth Day, Senator Nelson, also went beyond clean air and clean water and said that what we're really after is, quote, an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all other human beings and all other living creatures. Now, like Armin, I remember that period, and I'm proud of the degree of environmental awareness that US citizens showed at that time. The evolution since then is very disquieting. The other point I want to make on commemorating April 22nd, 50 years ago, is that the International Earth Day that we are celebrating did indeed become global, and it took the General Assembly of the United Nations to proclaim it as such in 2009, when the General Assembly proclaimed International Mother Earth Day, that has been celebrated on April 22nd ever since. Why Mother Earth Day? Clearly the reason of calling it Mother Earth Day was because the UN at that time had become acutely aware of the significance of the values of indigenous peoples regarding the earth, which they identified and deeply believed and believe today is their mother. It's a deep spiritual understanding that indigenous peoples have of the value of indigenous knowledge on how humans should relate to Mother Earth. I'm in the process now of attending a period of reflection of an organization on whose board I sit called Cultural Survival, which seeks to protect indigenous people's rights. And it has obviously taken on the COVID-19 pandemic as a challenge for which the wisdom of indigenous peoples may have something to teach the world. The fact is that World Wildlife Fund, I'm going to return to that in a minute, WWF, has listed the top 200 areas with the highest and most threatened biodiversity. 95% of them are located in indigenous territories. And it's estimated that indigenous territories contain 80% of the Earth's biodiversity. The executive director of the organization that I was referring to recently publicized the following statement: we value having a multitude of relationships. That is why when we pray as indigenous peoples, we pray for all of our connections and relations in the world. We pray not only for human beings, but with their natural world. We do not objectify nature, animals, stones, birds, and rivers. They are participants in this life. We have a direct relationship with them. So the point is that Earth Day is called Mother Earth Day in acknowledging that contrary to the advanced civilizations, whether it's former colonized countries or the industrialized West and so on, the best wisdom on how to deal with the earth has come from indigenous peoples. Now let me turn to the question that I was asked to address: what comes next? And I think two factors support the pessimists who have some doubts that the clean air, and I think those of you who can see this may remember these various images showing India Gate before and after. Indeed, there has been an opportunity, and a recent study or a recent series of interviews by the BBC was addressing the question, can the COVID-19 lockdown spark a clean air movement? People are seeing for the first time, many people for the first time in their lives, blue skies and as you described, the mountain ranges that were invisible before. The Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air has been also tracking, like the project that was just described to us, the evolution of these clean air. And the Chief Executive Officer of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, Dr. Ghosh, mentioned, we don't yet have democratic demand for clean air. He still hopes that, quote, the experience of blue skies and fresh air could be a trigger to create a democratic demand for clean air in India. We have to learn lessons to deploy the economic recovery from the pandemic. We need growth, jobs, and sustainable development, says Dr. Ghosh. Cleaning up the air could be the key. For too long, Indians have have ignored their right to breathe. But here's the reasons for the pessimism. First, business supported by government subsidies, especially in the United States, subsidies for the oil and gas industry, will want to become productive again, hire workers, and go back to producing and marketing what was successful for the bottom line in the past and what they think will be successful for the bottom line in the future. It will take a massive political movement to halt this. Secondly, climate resilience funding in those states, countries, and cities that support the science of the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and the targets of the Paris Agreement may become and are already becoming unavailable. The New York Times reported yesterday that the economic toll of coronavirus is forcing cities and states to redirect money away from projects that provide climate resilience in a shift that threatens to tackle one crisis at the expense of another. The point here is important because those who are on board already to invest massively in infrastructure to alter the climate disaster that is taking place, to shift the resources, to protect cities, to wean away from fossil fuels, have allocated resources that are no longer available to do that. A major example is my birthplace, San Francisco. Quoting the Chief Resilience Officer for San Francisco, and I'll end with this because I know I've taken too long. The Chief Resilience Officer in the city of San Francisco said, if San Francisco can't protect residents and its economy from the coronavirus now, then it will be harder to raise money later for the infrastructure project it needs to defend against climate change. So the dual pressures that we have that endanger our awakening through our observation of what clean air can be really like, and the need to move faster to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement. The two challenges to that are the strong business interests with their support in governments, especially the governments like the United States, that are willing to put resources to restore the industries that were polluting the skies in the past. And secondly, even for those who have allocated resources to do something about it, about the climate crisis, those resources now have to go back to establishing livelihoods for people who have suffered from COVID-19. So the danger that lies ahead is one genuinely of democratic governance. It's going to take a massive movement to shift the trend away from these two forces. I apologize for taking so long, but I'm very passionate about this issue.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. It was we learned a lot of things from what you said, and it's not really the best of the things to know that, and we already can anticipate that, to regain the livelihoods, to bring people back to jobs, to maybe to develop the economy. We might have to compromise on the environmental aspects. We might, some resources which were already allocated to environmental projects, or to clean energy, or to clean air, clean water, might have to be compromised, and which is not something great, because we know that these things, the climate, the environment is already in a state, it's in a very bad state, and we need to move forward from here, not backwards. If we take a backward turn, it can be, it can bring harsh consequences. The COVID-19 has taught us, that mother nature is superior, it took the COVID-19, unfortunately it took us the COVID-19 to learn that we have to coexist with other living beings on this earth, and mother nature is taking this opportunity to heal herself. The COVID-19, when people are locked in their homes, when there are no cars out there, when industries are shut down, it's an opportunity for her to heal herself. Now, while you say, it will take a massive movement from our part to focus on environment, to focus on projects related to environment, to focus on projects related to clean air, clean water, clean energy. International movements or international cooperation is very much needed for that. International efforts are needed for bringing this together, and prospects of international cooperations after the pandemic is very essential. How the international body will move forward regarding the prospects to restore the environment, or to carry on these kind of movements. So if I can ask Professor Abhijit, to share us some insights about how the international cooperation will be vital for these kind of for these kind of issues to take place. And just before you start, Professor Banerjee, I would also like to say, people who are attending this panel discussion, if you have any questions, there's a chat box. You can type your comments or questions on the chat box, and I can read it out to the panelists. If you have a specific question to them, or if you have a comment, I can read it out to the panelists after Professor Abhijit is done. Yes. Professor Abhijit, you are not audible.
Okay, I forgot to switch on I had muted my microphone because of the echo. Okay, so thank you for the introduction and welcome everyone. So my topic is on international cooperation. Let me begin by saying that we have been talking a lot of air pollution, and the vast majority of air pollution is from the burning of fossil fuels. And we all know that we need to move away from fossil fuels to address climate change. So I'll pivot my discussion a little bit towards addressing climate change, the international cooperation or lack of it for climate change, which would automatically, if we are able to succeed in moving away from fossil fuels, that would automatically take care of the air pollution problem. So climate change, as you know, that our entire economies all over the world are dependent on fossil fuels. So we can't hope to try to achieve anything on our own. So we would need international cooperation. It's obviously a very significant international issue. However, for those who have followed the process over the years, we have seen that the international progress on climate change has stagnated. We are all familiar with the Paris Climate Change Agreement in 2015, in which world leaders agreed that we should not cross 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5, because beyond that would be catastrophic climate change. Within 2 degrees, we can still manage, survive, adapt, but beyond 2 degrees would be catastrophic. So people agreed to that, but we have not seen much progress. Emissions keep rising every year. And why is that? Many reasons, some of which have been already touched upon. One of the major reasons is that governments and industries, we tend to think of climate change as a long-term problem, but we are seeing that it is really coming at us very fast, much faster than we expected. And because we see it as a long-term problem, we tend to value the short-term costs of taking action much more. So if we take dramatic action now, it will hurt our economy, whatnot, people will lose jobs. Where is the money to invest in clean technology? Always prioritizing our short-term costs and ignoring the long-term consequences. On top of that, we have had misinformation. misinformation campaigns by vested interests who want to preserve the status quo, which has had a very significant impact in misleading people about the dangers of climate change. So as we noted, emissions keep rising. The really scary statistic is that in order to meet or remain below the 2 degrees Celsius target, we have what is called a carbon budget. The concept is very simple. We can only burn so much more carbon. If we burn more than that, our 2 degrees Celsius will reach that limit. So currently the pace at which we are burning, we have only about 10 years or a little more than 10 years to reach that carbon budget. So that is why it is so urgent that we don't have, the pace at which we are going is so slow. We don't have 50 years. If you had 50 years, maybe it would be okay. But the pace at which we are burning our annual emissions, we will burn through the carbon budget within about 10 years. Some studies say a little more, but around that time. So now we really have to wake up, and our normal international cooperation system is not been making a lot of progress. So does this pandemic give us a new opportunity? Some people believe, or they hope, that this lockdown would perhaps lead to 2019 being the peak year of global carbon emissions, which means that from 2020 onwards, global carbon emissions will start declining. Will it happen? Will it not happen? That's up to us. But this provides a unique opportunity, as many of the panelists have said. All our industries are down, traffic is down, so our emissions are down. Will we continue on this downward trend? Will 2019 be the max? Only time will tell. But unfortunately, the international annual negotiations, the annual meeting of the Conference of Parties of the UN was going to happen in Glasgow this year for the UN Climate Treaty, but that was postponed indefinitely because of the pandemic. However, one encouraging sign is that environment ministers of 30 countries are meeting this week. Actually, as we speak, today and tomorrow, environment ministers of 30 countries are meeting on exactly this topic: green stimulus. How can we, a green recovery? How can we move our recovery in a different direction and not continue in business as usual? Will it achieve something substantial? We don't know, but at least it's an encouraging sign to see. Now, let me just mention a couple of things about the green recovery or green stimulus. What can governments do as we come out of this economic devastation? What type of recovery, what type of stimulus things can government do to move us in the right direction? And there are plenty of economists and policy experts who have laid out the steps that can be taken. These include in not just direct investments in renewable energy and green technology, but also it does not need to be restricted on only the renewable energy or clean technology sectors. The stimulus or recovery can be targeted to all other sectors of the economy, but with conditions. That I will bail you out, governments will bail you out, but on the condition that you meet certain targets. Let's say the automobile sector. In India, the automobile sector was hurting even before the pandemic, and now everything has crashed. So one condition for the government to, I will give you loans or grants to recover from the economic crash, provided that you meet certain quota of emission cards or adoption of electric vehicles. So a much accelerated adoption of electric vehicles. Similarly, in other countries where electric vehicles are already somewhat affordable, governments can use stimulus money to create charging infrastructure. Many people don't buy electric cars because there's no charging infrastructure in their neighborhoods. So the stimulus money can be spent on charging infrastructure. Another example, many examples, another very useful example is energy efficiency retrofits. Enormous amounts of money can be spent on energy efficiency retrofits, whether it's for buildings or even changing furnaces. In cold countries, for example, there's a lot of natural gas used for heating. So there's a big push to convert that into electric heating, so that if you adopt renewable energy, you can use renewable energy for electric heating. But that requires an enormous retrofits of existing buildings, which is very, very expensive. So now when you use public money during the recovery and stimulus to do these targeted things, you are locking in all these green practices, locking in all these, the move in the right direction, while also creating thousands of jobs. Study after study has shown that investments in renewable energy, clean technology, energy efficiency create far more jobs than investments in, let's say, coal or conventional energy systems. So it's like a double benefit. We are we're jump-starting the economy, we are locking us in the right direction, and we're also creating jobs. So all these are well known. However, in reality, what are the prospects of governments making the right choices and moving in the right direction? So if you think about the prospects, there are some recent lessons that give us a little bit of a pause. Professor Marx hinted a little bit on this. If you look at some recent events, we see a lot of pessimistic examples. For example, the big economic financial crisis during 2008, when we were coming out of this crisis, there was a lot of economic stimulus, and there was a lot of talk about reorienting the economy in a more sustainable direction. Not only sustainable for environment, but also sustainable in terms of more equality and whatnot. However, we have seen that largely didn't happen. One example, Professor Marx was talking about the Trump administration. For example, the Trump administration has actually lowered many standards that the Obama administration in the US had put in place as a condition for the recovery, as a condition for bailout of the auto industry in the US. The Obama administration instituted a very, very big jump in fuel economy standards. And once the Trump administration came in, they kind of they're trying to replace that. They're trying to water it down. Also, if you look at even just recently at the international response to the pandemic, we have seen instead of international cooperation, we have seen a very messy response. With each country, it's like each country for itself. There is a politicization of the response. There's finger pointing between countries. There's finger pointing with on the World Health Organization. Every country is trying to buy masks and equipment and tests and vaccines on its own with very, very little cooperation. So we see another example of the opposite of what should be happening. Finally, another recent example I would like to point out is the devastating wildfires in Australia, which are worsened by, scientists say, which are worsened many, many times by climate change. What happened as a response to these devastating, unprecedented wildfires, many people had hoped that there would be a big public momentum towards taking action on climate change. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. What has been happening instead is a lot of government and public attention towards specific rescue and rebuilding efforts. And we have seen this time and time again. We have devastating floods, lot of investment on rebuilding from the floods, recovery and rebuilding from the floods, recovery and rebuilding from hurricanes, recovery and rebuilding from wildfires. But nobody is talking about the big picture. Why are these happening in the first place? So all these are kind of pessimistic signs which don't bode well for international cooperation going forward. But let me just end with a couple of optimistic signs as well. We all know that the US presidential election is coming up, and there is some hope that there will be a change in administration, and perhaps the new administration will once again assume leadership of not only US action, but also international action. Maybe Professor Marx or Rosenkranz can comment more on that. But also another encouraging thing is what we're seeing is that instead of governments, we are seeing corporations, especially private finance, banks and finance, who are trying to take very significant action, stopping investments in fossil fuels. Because fossil fuel, they start to realize, investment firms, finance firms, they realize that going forward, a few decades from now, investments in fossil fuels are going to lead to economic crash. So they are being using foresight, they're being farsighted, and they are pulling out investments. So perhaps some people are hopeful that rather than trying to drag governments into taking action, perhaps these actions by private financial actors can lead to much quicker consequences than business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit, for your insightful discussions on the role of international bodies and different political administrations, how they can actually make an effect into moving towards, greener, into a greener future. So we heard optimistic as well as pessimistic things, but it will depend on how the international bodies come together and how they look at it, and what kind of stimulus are there for people to move towards green economy, or green, or towards a greener future. So we have covered the first round of the discussions. There are a few questions that have come up. So if I may just go to the questions directly, and then we will continue with the discussion. So the first question says, good evening, Dr. Shriru. Moving forward, how do you reckon green energy will be adopted and scaled by large developing nations such as India? I think all of the panelists, maybe the question is directed to Professor Shriru, but we all can contribute to this, if whatever discussion we want to have around this.
Maybe energy question. I can take the energy question.
Yes, sure.
Okay, and specifically on India. India, if you, I'm not sure if you're aware, India is already a leader in renewable energy, particularly in terms of growth rates of renewable energy, particularly solar and wind. However, since we are starting from basically zero, it's still not a very big share, and this is true for all countries. It's growing very fast, but it's still not a big share. The question is, what are we going to do going forward? So that is a little difficult question to answer, because will the government's priorities change because of the big economic crisis? Will they in one weakness, if I can call it that, is that governments tend to invest in things that are seen to create a lot of economic growth. So and another phrase that is commonly heard is called shovel ready. What are shovel ready projects that can go in right away? Because now the situation is so desperate, so the governments all over the world, not just India, they tend to prioritize projects which can be started right now. So perhaps if you look at it from that angle, maybe coal or other infrastructure projects are waiting in the pipeline, ready for investment. So in fact, India and China are actually talking about increasing that kind of the wrong kind of investment under the circumstances. But overall, the trajectory is good. The momentum for clean energy is good, mainly because, obviously because of government policy, but also because of large-scale investments. The costs have come down so much that they are starting to become competitive on their own. This is the key thing, that we are very close to reaching market parity, where clean energy will become competitive with conventional energy, fossil fuels. So at that point, we will not have to depend on government policy anymore. It will just take on its own momentum. It will take on a life of its own. So we are very close to that. So whether the next few years may perhaps be a little bit of a turmoil because of the economic crash, but the momentum will continue forward. The main question is, will it be enough? Will this momentum be enough given the 10-year the time, short time that we just mentioned? Will this momentum be enough, or we will need even more dramatic action by governments?
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry. Yeah. The next question is, the pandemic and lockdown have triggered a significant change in the climate sector indirectly. In the light of these, can we see this lockdown for much shorter periods over certain periods in the coming years as a solution to this global climatic scenario? If not, what can we learn from this lockdown causing a sharp decline in the pollution, which was not possible for years? Yes, Professor Chaudhary, yes.
So yes, that's a valid question. That's a really valid question. That can we bring in this lockdown more frequently to benefit the climate movement, climate effort, something, the air quality and all the stuff. But we have to understand this thing. Yes, at one point of time, it might seem like that this lockdown is helping us immensely because we can breathe well and we can see the stars. But apart from that, we have got to think about this thing, that when you talk about environmental sustainability, environmental development, the stars and breathing problem, those are only a minute part of the whole mix. We have to think about water, we have to think about food, we have to think about land, we have to think about our ecosystem as a whole. What this lockdown has done practically, it has practically stalled a lot of the environmental projects going on in the country right now, because people cannot come out of their home to actually work out there in the real field. Say for example, if we consider the Manrega, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, under Manrega, a lot of rural people, they earn their livelihood by working on farmlands, water projects, irrigation projects. So it's just a 100 days work. But unfortunately, during the lockdown, a lot of that work has been stalled. When we look at environmental sustainability, the broader perspective of climate change, we have to take into account all the smaller pieces that feed to the climate change. Now, to rectify one thing, we cannot stall the other movements. So maybe the government people, or maybe what I'm thinking is like that in India, we still are looking kind of a political view of the environment. Everything is related to political decisions. So if we can come down to some kind of a political view of environmental policy making, that maybe we can bring up the lockdown once a month for about 6 hours a day for the weekend or something. We can think about climate change in terms of Delhi air quality or the large urban hubs air quality, but at the same time we have to think about the other factors. Just now what Professor Marx, Professor Rosenkrantz, Professor Banerjee said, that when we are combating climate change, we are looking at a multidisciplinary mix of things. Just to fix one thing, we cannot think that if we fix, so in a whole mix, we cannot change the numbers or tweak the buttons for one thing, because all the rest of the buttons are connected to this one button. So we have got to come to systems optimization kind of thing, that how much of lockdown every month or maybe every day for 15 minutes or 5 minutes sometimes might help the daily air quality or any air quality parameters without causing any damage to rest of the environmental movement. So it's not an easy thing. A lot of parties, the stakeholders, the policymakers, the researchers, the scientists, the general public, they have to come together across the board to chat up to find a real solution to it. So it's not so easy to come up with a solution. We are very enthusiastic that the Delhi air quality is getting really improved day by day, but at the same time, our projects on water, energy, farming, they are taking a bitter hit. So we have to think of that. I'm going to ask Professor Rosenkrantz, Marx, and Professor Banerjee on this thing. How can we bring different people together in the same mix so that we do not compromise our chances of economic diversification, but we push towards our climate change mitigation efforts.
We have one more question before maybe we can continue the discussion with what Professor Chaudhary had asked, though we are running short of time. So let me just ask the question that we have here. How the overall ecology of the country will be affected after this pandemic is over? Do we hope that despite a lot of economic loss, is it providing good for recovery of good quality environment? So it's kind of continuation to what Professor Chaudhary just emphasized, that that how different things will balance out together. Can we look at just one parameter and forget about the rest, or do we have to work in such a way that it's an ideal balance or a good balance between all the parameters that we have here? I open this question to the entire panel here.
It's very similar to the previous question. So in the interest of time, can we jump to the next question, which is addressed to Dr. Rosenkrantz?
Sure. Good evening, Dr. Rosenkrantz. Black swan events like these are certainly disruptive. How can multilateral international agreements be strengthened in order to prepare for future black swan events?
Unmuted. How do I do that?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, international agreements are very secondary. Domestic law is primary, and international agreements are not self-enforcing. They have to be backed up by domestic or, municipal law. So I don't rely too heavily on international agreements. They're mostly aspirational. However, a fact that we have to really keep in mind is that the fossil fuel industry is enormous. The automobile industry is tied into it. The aerospace industry is tied into it. Transport in general is tied into it. Altogether, that makes for a very huge interest group that is powerful, rich, has a lot of political support because of contributions to people's campaigns and so on. So the result is that we have a very strong industry, fossil fuel industry and aerospace and so on, that is dominating the politics and economics of most countries. So that's why this effort to defeat the fossil fuel or disinvest from the fossil fuel industry is so important. If we get widespread disinvestment from the fossil fuel industry and put that money, as Abhijit mentioned, into renewable energy and the jobs that will create, and the lower costs of energy that will mean, that would be a terrific result. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Abhijit. Yeah.
If I may just add one point to it, just to supplement Dr. Rosenkranz's point, that as I completely agree that his main point that international agreements are more aspirational, there's very little enforcement. The only exception are international agreements which have trade sanctions associated with them. So for climate change, we haven't seen that. So there is a little bit of thinking going on right now that can we design a new architecture of new climate treaty going forward, where there would be some sort of trade sanctions or, like, let's say, import tariffs. Say countries which sign up for taking action on climate change will be allowed to impose a carbon tariff on other countries which have not signed up for climate change. So if that is allowed, that will carry some teeth, and that may hopefully make a difference. But again, the political will for doing that is a different question, but that is one way of making it more effective.
Can I make a short question?
You have 1 minute. Yeah, sure.
Yes. I wanted to ask Professor Marx that is there a way we can bring our new generation, the young people, the young student, is there a way we can bring our young students into the whole mix? Means how we can make them more motivated for environmental management, environmental sustainability kind of thing. Means what do you think? Means what are the ways we can make our new generation bring into the environmental movement?
Can't hear you.
Audio.
There we
Oh,
go.
you're fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. We have 2 minutes to
better?
end the
Okay.
session. Yeah.
You want to end the session? Can you hear me?
Yes, 2
you hear
minutes.
me
2
now?
minutes, Professor Marx. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
we
I
can hear you.
won't have time. So let me show this to those who are viewing. In case you get an opportunity, this is the type of event and World Wildlife Fund, and I want to do a shout out to Mulika Arabi for World Wildlife Fund, is the type of event that mobilizes youth. Greta Thunberg mobilizes youth. Our generation has proved incapable of addressing it. Armin Rosenkrantz will remember well that in the early 70s, there was a willingness to transform lifestyles. We cannot function with the consumer society that we have and the utilization of private automobiles in the way they have dominated societies. And as India has identified its growth and its improvement of the middle classes by owning one and then two cars and so on, it won't work. It's going to fail. We were aware of that in the early 70s and we failed. It takes a Greta Thunberg to remind us, to say, we cannot trust you. You failed. It is up to the youth to do it. So my answer to that question is the youth movement has to be strong enough to force the political will beyond little tweaking of treaties and adopting occasional legislation here and there. It takes a radical change in lifestyle and a radical change in the legal framework under which energy is generated and utilized. So that's my final observation, with, again, an invitation for people who are interested to go to that Earth Day event. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for asserting it so beautifully to the youths that it is the youths who need to, mobilize this and take this forward, because, it is on them now to carry this movement forward. The movement that started 50 years back, it's a youth, the generation of today, which has to, take this movement forward. We can talk hours, we can just spend hours discussing this, but unfortunately we are running out of time. Some questions, there were some questions, but we are out of time, so we would maybe come back for another webinar and continue discussing this. But thank you everyone for joining this panel. It was a very enjoyable one, and I think we all have learned from each other, and the viewers have also had a lot of information from this session. Thank you so much. Thank you for being on this session.
Thank you.
The final thing that I would want to mention, to the students who are out there, to our prospective students who are thinking of joining Jindal. We at the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, we are starting a new program from the fall of 2020. It's called the Jindal Fellowship Program, Research and Fellowship Program, and it's a unique opportunity for you who have finished your third year of college and you're thinking of higher studies, and you want to take a break here in between, or do or engage yourself in research or in internships or advanced coursework. There's a program right there for you that we are introducing here from the fall of 2020, and please let us know if you have any questions. Our admissions teams is there. We, the faculty of Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, you can find us at our webpage. We are here to answer any questions. So please look at the program. If it interests you, please let us know. Thank you for this wonderful session. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.